I was born with a gift for storytelling, but at 20, I was framed for plagiarism in front of the entire world while every judge and mentor I respected turned their backs on me. Even after coming back to right those wrongs, I find no joy in the victory. I realize the most terrifying thing isn't a single villain. It is the mindless crowd that follows every trend to destroy someone's life for sport. Right after winning the $80 million lottery, I officially withdrew from the National Creative Writing Competition. When my classmate Ethan found out, he walked right up and slapped me across the face. "You are deserting us at the most critical moment, and it makes me wonder if you care at all about the years Professor Miller spent mentoring you or the hopes your friends placed on your shoulders. Or maybe there is something wrong with your manuscript, and you're terrified the judges will find out you are a fraud." In my previous life, Ethan was the star of the National Creative Writing Competition because the manuscript he submitted was a word-for-word copy of my own work. Back then, I went to the editor who helped me brainstorm and the friends who stayed up all night helping me edit, begging them to help me clear my name. Instead of helping, they published a public apology on my behalf, pleading with the judges to be lenient because of my youth and give me a chance to redeem myself. The internet was ruthless, flooding my notifications with comments calling me a shameless thief. Since I couldn't produce a shred of physical evidence to prove my innocence, the label of plagiarist was burned into my reputation forever. My life spiraled as I was expelled from Columbia University and hit with a massive lawsuit for breach of contract. My mother exhausted herself trying to fight for my rights, but she became a target of the same online mob and eventually collapsed from the stress and harassment. A series of devastating blows crushed me in a single night, dragging me into a bottomless pit of despair. With no future and no way out, I threw myself off the roof of a building, thinking only of freeing my family from the burden of my existence. When I finally opened my eyes again, I found myself back in my old apartment exactly 1 week before the competition deadline. My older sister Ava made a gesture toward the kitchen and said that she had cooked my favorite ribs, insisting that I eat something since I had been writing all day. My sister Ava looked at me with a face full of feigned worry, and I was so startled to see her alive that I nearly toppled out of my chair. At that exact moment, my childhood friend Hannah pushed the door open and stepped inside the room. She handed me a small box with a warm smile, telling me she had heard my shoulders were bothering me from all the writing. She insisted that I try the new massager she bought to help me relax after a long day of work. This display of affection was something I was used to, and in my previous life, I truly believed I was the luckiest man alive. My sister Ava was 5 years older than me, and she had always taken care of every little detail in my life since we were children. Then there was Hannah, my childhood friend and my first love, who felt even closer than a blood relative. Now that I have a second chance, the sight of them only sends a freezing chill down my spine. In my past life during the National Creative Writing Competition, the piece I submitted was identical to the one entered by Ethan. The moment the judges noticed the duplication, they immediately launched a full-scale investigation into the matter. Since I was already an established writer with several awards under my belt, I was favored to win the entire competition. However, once the scandal broke, I was instantly sucked into a massive storm of public outrage and condemnation. I turned to the editor who had been my mentor and to Hannah, the person I trusted most in the world, begging them to speak up for me. I never expected that they would both turn me down without a second thought. Ava went behind my back and released a public statement of apology without even talking to me first. She pleaded with the competition committee for mercy, claiming I was just a naive kid who made a mistake and deserved a chance to learn from it. The news went viral on Twitter instantly, and the comments were vicious. People said it was no wonder I had the nerve to steal in such a big contest since I had an editor's sister covering for me, and they called my whole family trash. Others commented that a simple apology shouldn't be enough to fix this, and they asked if we thought the public was stupid. Some people joked that if apologies were enough, then we wouldn't need the police, while others mocked the excuse that I was still young. Users pointed out that I was over 18 and told me to go be a pampered brat at home instead of disgusting everyone in the writing community. Under the crushing weight of public pressure, The organizing committee officially rejected Ava's plea for leniency. The truth was that I only entered the competition for the $50,000 grand prize. My sister had suffered from a severe illness that supposedly ruined her throat, leaving her vocal cords so damaged that she was mute. I wanted that money to pay for a specialist in Los Angeles to see if her voice could be restored through surgery. Instead, I left the competition with nothing but a massive legal bill for damages due to the alleged breach of contract. Meanwhile, Ethan, who had absolutely no writing experience before this, shocked everyone by winning the first-place trophy. His winning entry was even hailed by critics as one of the most brilliant short stories published in the last decade. The film rights were sold to a major studio in Hollywood almost immediately, with a big movie adaptation announced shortly after. Overnight, Ethan transformed from a nobody into the nation's most beloved literary heartthrob. As for me, I became the ultimate villain of the literary world, a common thief that everyone felt entitled to harass. The stain on my reputation was so severe that the University of Chicago moved quickly to expel me from my degree program. To pay off the astronomical legal fees, I was forced to work as a delivery driver since I no longer had a college degree. Whenever a customer recognized my face from the news, they would intentionally leave terrible reviews and report me just to ensure I didn't get paid for my labor. My mother spent her days trying to defend my name to anyone who would listen, but she was met with online harassment and cruel jokes about her mental health. The stress eventually broke her, and her condition deteriorated so quickly that she was rushed into the intensive care unit. I took a grueling job hauling cement at a construction site just to keep up with her medical bills. After only a few days, the foreman recognized me and kicked me off the site while refusing to pay me a single cent for the work I had already done. Shortly after that, my phone rang with a call from the hospital staff. They informed me that my mother's organs were failing and that I needed to prepare myself for the inevitable. When that final spark of hope was extinguished, I felt completely hollow inside and lost any reason to keep breathing. Late that night, I made my way to the roof of the hospital and stepped off the edge into the darkness. Now that I have opened my eyes to this second chance, I am back in the week before the deadline. Looking at my sister and Hannah pretending to care for me, my heart is filled with a complex mixture of rage and cold calculation. Ava used her hands to sign to me that she had used her connections to get exclusive research material for my story. She placed a thick stack of papers on my desk and promised me that if I used them, the first-place trophy would be mine for sure. Hannah laughed and teased me by saying I had better win that championship. She joked that she was already looking forward to me spending that prize money on a fancy dinner at a steakhouse in Manhattan. In my past life, I knew she was just joking, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. I kept telling myself that Ava was my own flesh and blood and would never hurt me. And though Hannah was blunt, she had always been my closest ally. Back then, I was absolutely convinced that they weren't the ones plotting against me. I had to figure out exactly where everything went wrong in my first life. I had been a star writer since elementary school and continued to publish stories in major literary magazines throughout my years at NYU. Professor Miller always told me that if I truly applied myself, winning a national competition would be a walk in the park. That was why he was the only person who remained firmly by my side when the accusations first started flying. Beyond that, my serialized novels were already being published and selling quite well on Amazon. There is absolutely no logical reason for me to steal work from someone like Ethan who had never written a page in his life. In the previous timeline, Ethan had suddenly released a screenshot of our submission timestamps to the public. The digital records clearly showed that he had uploaded his manuscript a full hour before I had uploaded mine. He was an hour ahead of me, but the most damaging part was that he produced social media posts from a week prior. Those posts detailed his entire creative process and the exact outline of the story I had written. The internet exploded with hatred, and the comments were impossible to ignore. People said it was obvious James stole from Ethan because the evidence was undeniable, and they wondered how I could even try to defend myself. Users speculated that since I was an established author, all my previous books were probably stolen too, and I just hadn't been caught yet. They praised my sister and Hannah for having the integrity not to lie for me, saying that without them, the true author would have been forgotten. The scandal grew until it was the top trending topic on Twitter across the country. The competition committee felt the pressure and immediately began a formal audit of the evidence Ethan had provided. After a thorough technical review, they found that all of Ethan's digital timestamps were authentic and showed no signs of tampering. Their final, official conclusion was that I had plagiarized Ethan's work. I was completely blindsided by the outcome because that story was my own work based on the research Ava had given me. I couldn't understand how my own writing had somehow become a case of plagiarism against me. The problem was that I had no physical proof to back up my side of the story. The thing that haunted me the most was how Ethan's manuscript managed to match mine word for word, down to the very last punctuation mark. I wondered if Ava had accidentally given him the same research materials she gave me. However, looking at Ava and Hannah now, their behavior seemed perfectly normal and supportive, as if they were entirely on my side. I decided to start my own investigation by digging through Ethan's Twitter and Instagram history. If things were following the same timeline as my previous life, he should have already posted his fake project outline by this afternoon. Since they were hovering over me, I couldn't just pull out my phone and start scrolling. I quickly scribbled a fake outline on a piece of paper to act as a cover while I pretended to have a sudden, agonizing stomach cramp. I used the pain as an excuse to run to the bathroom, but Hannah just rolled her eyes at me. She snapped that I was always making excuses and asked why I was trying to slack off when Ava had worked so hard to organize my research. Ava quickly stepped in with her hands, signing that there was still a week left and that Hannah shouldn't pressure me. She promised that as long as I followed the plan she laid out, the grand prize was already as good as mine. I knew that my window of opportunity to uncover the truth was rapidly closing. Once I was safely inside the bathroom, I locked the door and pulled out my phone to scroll through Ethan's recent social media activity. His family was well off, with his father being a high-level executive at a major corporation and his mother working as a tenured professor at NYU. He was a good-looking guy with a decent following on TikTok, but we had never actually been friends. Ava's job in publishing required her to interact with Ethan's mother quite often, so it made sense that they knew each other. I recalled a moment when she signed to Hannah that Ethan was a sophisticated and charming young man, unlike a provincial guy like myself. She even encouraged Hannah to find a boyfriend like Ethan, someone with good looks and a wealthy family background. At the time, I thought she was just teasing us, but looking back now, I realized she was being entirely serious. I couldn't wrap my head around why someone with Ethan's social status would go out of his way to target me. Just as I was pondering this, I scrolled onto a new post he had shared just minutes ago. In the post, he proudly displayed his creative inspiration and a detailed story outline. I froze in place because the outline was an exact match for the research material Ava had just handed to me in the living room. Even the plot beats were identical to the ones I had just scribbled down as a decoy. The comments section was already blowing up with people praising his creativity and vision. One user wrote that they had never seen a story structure like this before and that the literary world finally had something fresh. Another encouraged him to finish writing it quickly, predicting that he would definitely take home the grand prize. You could call similar ideas a coincidence, but an identical outline was an impossible fluke. The only people who had access to my workspace during the last week were Ava and Hannah. Could it really be them? The moment that thought crossed my mind, a wave of cold dread washed over me, and I struggled to understand why they would ever betray me like this. I wondered if years of family bonds and shared memories were truly worth less than whatever short relationship they had with Ethan. I sat in that bathroom for an hour before finally coming to a daring conclusion about my next move. In my previous life, I had entered the competition with a high fantasy story, which was my specialty. Although it won, it was a fairly standard trope that didn't really push the boundaries of my writing. This time I decided to change my entire strategy by switching to a gritty suspense thriller. Since my last life was destroyed by accusations of stealing a fantasy plot, I would create something entirely different that no one could have predicted. Winning the trophy had become secondary to my main goal. My priority was proving that I was an original creator and clearing my name, though the stress of the sudden change kept me tossing and turning all night. Early the next morning, I slipped out of the house and went straight to Professor Miller's place. He was the first person who ever believed in my talent and the one who pushed me to pursue writing as a professional career. He had such high expectations for me in this competition. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face lit up with a warm smile, and he immediately handed me a hot breakfast sandwich, asking if I had eaten yet. He quickly sensed that something was weighing on me and asked me to tell him what was on my mind. I forced a small smile and asked if he would be disappointed in me if I failed to win the grand prize this time around. Professor Miller laughed and ruffled my hair, telling me that a trophy didn't define my worth as a writer. He said he knew my true potential and that there would always be another contest, and the only thing that mattered was that I found joy in my work. His words finally gave me some peace of mind. As I walked away from his house, an iMessage from Ava popped up on my screen asking where I had gone, saying Hannah was upset because she brought me breakfast and I wasn't there. I texted back that I had just stepped out to buy some research books and would be home soon. I had made up my mind to completely ignore the stack of research and ideas that Ava had prepared for me. I kept the change in my story's genre a secret from them, since they were currently my primary suspects. I headed straight to the campus library at NYU to start building my new suspense novel from scratch. I spent the entire day huddled in a corner of the library, and by the time the sun went down, I had finally finalized a brand new outline. I took a moment to stretch and decided to check Ethan's Twitter to see if he had made any more moves. Before I could even unlock my phone, Ava and Hannah suddenly appeared right in front of my table. I was stunned and immediately wondered how on earth they managed to find me without me saying a word. Ava placed a container of warm food on the table and signed that she was worried I would get so caught up in my writing that I would forget to eat dinner. Hannah pushed a thermos into my hands and told me she had spent the whole afternoon making chicken soup for me to keep my strength up. They both looked so sincerely worried about me that for a second, I almost doubted they could be capable of such a betrayal. I began to wonder if I was just being paranoid because if it wasn't them, I had no idea who else could be behind it. Despite the confusion in my head, I forced a smile and told them I was starving and that I would be right back after washing my hands. I grabbed my phone and headed toward the restroom, but instead of going into a stall, I stopped by the sinks. I opened Ethan's Twitter profile, and sure enough, there was a brand new update waiting for me. His post read that he couldn't believe how shameless some people were, claiming someone had quietly stolen the ideas and outline he had so generously shared. He announced that he would have to scrap his entire project and start over from scratch because of this theft. He had attached a photo of a guy sitting in a library, and anyone who knew me would recognize the back of my head instantly. My blood ran cold as I wondered who could have possibly taken that photo of me. The comments were full of fans expressing their sympathy and worrying that he wouldn't have enough time to finish a new book before the deadline. Ethan replied to one of them, saying he was already planning a suspense thriller and that he had miraculously finished the new outline already. I stood there in total shock because I hadn't told a single soul that I was switching my genre to suspense. There was no way it was a coincidence that we both suddenly chose the exact same niche at the same time. It was clear that someone was monitoring every single move I made. I looked at the bathroom door, wondering if it was Ava or Hannah, and struggled to find a reason why they would want to destroy me. Suddenly, a hand tapped my shoulder and a voice asked what I was doing just standing there. I jumped in surprise and turned to see Ava and Hannah looking at me, having come to find me when I didn't return to the table. I was still reeling from the discovery and instinctively avoided their eyes, telling Ava that they should go home and that I would eat in a bit. I was terrified that they had seen the Twitter feed on my phone screen. Before I could say anything else, Hannah snapped and accused me of being ungrateful after they had traveled all this way to bring me dinner. She shouted that she knew I had been acting suspicious and distant for days and asked if I had any heart left at all. Ava quickly stepped in with sign language, trying to calm her down by saying that Hannah was just blunt because she cared about me. She signed that they were simply worried I was pushing myself too hard and would burn out before the competition. I immediately told her that I understood and appreciated their concern, but suggested that I stay in the dorms for the next few days. I told them it would save them the trouble of having to look after me while I finished my work. Hannah gave a cold snort and said I could do whatever I wanted before dragging Ava out of the study area. I finally let out a long breath of relief once they were gone. I headed back to my dorm around 10:30 that night and immediately heard my roommates buzzing about Ethan. I walked over to see what the fuss was about and found them looking at a new photo he had posted on Facebook. The picture showed 3 hands holding soda cans and a toast with a caption thanking 2 beautiful ladies for bringing him food. I recognized the jewelry and the shape of those hands instantly. It was definitely Ava and Hannah. I had no idea they were on such intimate terms with him, but the comments below the post confirmed everything. Hannah had commented that Ethan would always be her favorite guy and promised him that she would make sure he won the first place trophy. I stared at the screen for several seconds, wondering if I was hallucinating from stress. However, when I hit the refresh button, the comments had been deleted and vanished without a trace. At this point, I was absolutely certain that the plagiarism scandal from my past life was engineered by the 2 of them. Strangely enough, arriving at this conclusion didn't even shock me anymore. I felt safer knowing I was staying in the dorms because it meant they couldn't monitor me as easily as they did at home. I finally felt like I had enough breathing room to focus on my writing. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I caught my roommate, Sam, out of the corner of my eye, acting suspiciously near my bed. He was actually going through my private notebook, and my temper flared as I sat up and yelled, asking him what the hell he thought he was doing. Sam jumped in fright and dropped my notebook onto the floor with a loud thud. He snapped back at me, telling me to stop shouting and claiming he already knew I was the one who stole his cousin's work. He grumbled about how unlucky he was to share a room with a thief and said I had no right to be rude to him since he hadn't kicked me out yet. It turned out that Sam was actually Ethan's first cousin. He intentionally leaked my personal details and dorm number in the comments section of Ethan's Twitter post. Within minutes, my iMessage and Instagram DMs were flooded with hateful messages and graphic insults from total strangers. The harassment escalated until people were showing up outside my dorm, and someone even snuck in to pour dirty water on my bed and put dead cockroaches in my water bottle. I reached my breaking point and decided to reach out to Professor Miller for help. In my previous life, he was the only person who tirelessly fought to clear my name. Even though he couldn't change the final outcome, he was the only one who never once doubted my integrity. This time, after hearing my situation, he didn't even hesitate before handing me a set of keys to a small studio apartment he owned near campus. He told me to move in immediately and focus entirely on the competition while ignoring the chaos outside. I decided I would deal with all the drama once the competition was over. I pushed through the stress and finally finished the last chapter of my novel just hours before the submission window closed. All that was left was the final click to upload my manuscript. Right at that moment, a notification popped up on my phone showing that Ethan had just posted on Twitter, announcing that his entry was officially submitted and thanking his fans for their support. He included a screenshot of his open document, and even with the blur, I could clearly read the first few paragraphs. It was a perfect word-for-word copy of the suspense thriller I had just finished writing. What made it worse was that his post was time-stamped 10 minutes before I had even finished my final draft. I lost my temper and smashed my laptop against the wall, wondering if I was cursed to repeat the same tragic fate in this life too. I was on the verge of giving up on everything until my phone buzzed with a notification from the State Lottery app. I checked the numbers and realized I had won the $80 million jackpot from a ticket I bought on a whim. I nearly leaped out of my seat in pure shock. My family had always struggled financially, and I was only able to afford NYU through student loans and my own meager writing income. The only reason I had entered this contest in the first place was for the prize money. Now that I was worth $80 million, the competition results didn't matter to me anymore. A new, much more satisfying plan began to take shape in my mind. If Ethan loved stealing my work so much, I was going to make sure he paid a heavy price for his greed. I kept my newfound wealth a secret from everyone and spent the next few hours quietly rewriting parts of my manuscript before resubmitting it. Since Ethan was so fond of copying my work, I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. As soon as the preliminary results were announced, Ethan rushed to start a TikTok live stream to share his writing process with his followers. The chat was moving so fast I could barely read it, with everyone praising his confidence and predicting a top 3 finish. Before Ethan could even say a word, Hannah jumped into the comments, declaring that he wasn't just top 3, but the guaranteed champion. She kept spamming that she had absolute faith in his talent. The entire chat was a sea of celebratory emojis and early congratulations for Ethan. However, right in the middle of all the praise, Ethan's expression suddenly went completely blank. The viewers were still typing confused questions when the situation shifted. A second later, several uniformed police officers walked right into the camera's view. They handcuffed Ethan in front of thousands of live viewers and told him in a cold tone that he was being detained. They informed him that they had received a credible report regarding his involvement in serious illegal activities. Even through the phone screen, the authority in the officers' voices was terrifyingly clear. Ethan's face turned a ghostly shade of white as his confident persona completely crumbled. To make matters worse for him, the viewership of the live stream didn't drop, but actually skyrocketed as people shared the link. The chat was in absolute chaos, with everyone demanding to know what was going on. People were asking how a wealthy and talented young author could be involved in a crime. Others were defending him, saying he was just a college student and that the police must have made a huge mistake. Some loyal fans even claimed it was a setup by someone jealous of his success. I sat back and watched, knowing exactly why Ethan was panicking. It was because his guilty conscience was finally catching up to him. After finding out I won the lottery, I had worn a heavy disguise to claim my prize at the lottery headquarters in Manhattan. Looking at the massive balance in my bank account, I felt years of financial anxiety simply evaporate into thin air. That new sense of freedom allowed my mind to become sharper and more focused than ever before. I started meticulously piecing together every detail I knew about Ethan's life and his so-called success. It was true that his father was an executive and his mother was a professor, but their combined income didn't add up. There was no way their salaries could support the incredibly expensive lifestyle Ethan flaunted on social media. He wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars and a limited edition watch worth nearly $100,000. Even his phone case was a rare designer collaboration that cost a fortune. Between the constant luxury vacations and the high-end designer gear, I became highly suspicious of where his money was actually coming from. I decided to use some of my winnings to hire a top-tier private investigator to dig into his background. It didn't take long for the investigator to come back with a report that left me speechless. It turned out that Ethan was a high-end escort, specifically working as a companion for wealthy older women on their international trips. While he was supposed to be studying, he spent his weekends catering to these women for massive cash tips. This illegal and undisclosed income was what funded his $100,000 a month lifestyle. Simply exposing his secret life wasn't enough to satisfy my need for justice after what he did to me. I decided to set a much more elaborate trap for him to fall into. Since Ethan was so obsessed with stealing my writing, I decided to use that exact habit to destroy him. I wanted to force him to admit to the world that he was a fraud, while simultaneously exposing all his dirty secrets. I proceeded with the suspense novel I had been writing for the competition. I carefully leaked the drafts in a way that made it incredibly easy for Ethan to find and steal them. He had no idea that I had planted a specific set of clues in the final chapters of the story. Anyone with an ounce of intelligence could follow those clues to a very real and very different ending than the one he expected. That secret ending was actually a coded confession of Ethan's own criminal activities. I wasn't worried at all about him noticing the trap, because I knew he wasn't smart enough to actually read the subtext of what he was stealing. He was far too arrogant to realize he was being played. My goal was to make him broadcast his own crimes to the entire nation during the most important competition of his life. I also wanted Ava and Hannah to see exactly what kind of person their perfect golden boy really was. As the officers began to lead him away, Ethan suddenly turned toward the phone camera and began screaming hysterically. He screamed that he was being framed and that I was the real criminal behind everything. He told his audience that I was the one who stole his work and that I was now lying to the police to destroy his life. His fans in the chat immediately started echoing his claims and calling for my arrest. Hannah was the loudest of all, posting that Ethan's prestigious family background made it impossible for him to ever commit such disgusting crimes. She insisted that I was just a jealous failure who was trying to smear a better man's reputation. Her reaction didn't surprise me at all, because it was exactly how she had behaved in my previous life. She had always been his most loyal defender, even when the truth was staring her in the face. What I didn't expect was for Ava to join the live stream next and start frantically typing in the comment section. She posted that Ethan was being framed and that a person of his character would never do anything wrong. She even offered to go live herself to testify for him and demanded a face-to-face confrontation with me to settle the matter. Hannah immediately agreed to join her, and I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh as I watched them play their parts. I was safely tucked away in Professor Miller's private studio, a place they had no way of finding. I wondered how they planned to confront me when they didn't even know where I was. To my shock, less than 10 minutes later, the door to my studio was kicked open with a violent crash. Ava stormed in and grabbed me by the collar, screaming that she knew I was behind the police report. She accused me of being a bitter loser who was only attacking Ethan because I was jealous of their close relationship. Hannah was right behind her, and she didn't hesitate to slap me across the face. She shouted that there was no need to ask because I had been acting like a shady criminal ever since the week before the competition. She claimed she knew all along that I was the one stealing Ethan's ideas from Twitter to use as my own. She yelled that Ethan was a saint for not exposing me earlier and called me a shameless coward for turning around and framing him instead. They continued to shout their accusations while holding their phones up to live stream the entire confrontation to their followers. I just looked at them calmly, feeling like I was seeing their true, ugly faces for the very first time. In my past life, I was obsessed with winning that money just so I could pay for Ava's throat surgery. I finally realized that her entire struggle with being mute was nothing more than a carefully crafted performance. Her being mute was a lie she used to manipulate my emotions and guilt me into entering the competition. It was all part of a long game to ensure I would walk right into the trap they had set for me. I reached out and slapped her back, my voice cold as ice as I asked her how long she had been practicing her fake sign language. I asked if she enjoyed playing the role of the victim just to lure me into their sick little game. Ava was so stunned by my sudden aggression that she actually lost her voice for real for a moment. I turned my gaze to Hannah and challenged her to produce a single shred of evidence that I had copied anything from Ethan, reminding her that slander was a serious crime. Hannah lifted her chin and insisted she wasn't lying because our contest entries were identical. She acted outraged that I would dare to strike her instead of begging for forgiveness for my supposed crimes. She asked if I had any shame left after trying to ruin Ethan's life. I let out a sharp laugh and told her that if she was wrong about the plagiarism, she would have to get on her knees and beg for my mercy. Hannah gave a look of pure disgust and said she was 100% certain I was a thief. She claimed the only evidence anyone needed was the fact that our stories were carbon copies of each other. My smile turned even colder as I asked her how she could possibly know what I had submitted. I asked if she had been secretly appointed as a judge or if she had just been stalking me and reading over my shoulder the entire time. Hannah's face went pale as she realized she had just admitted to knowing the contents of my private files. She started to stutter, trying to backtrack, but she ultimately doubled down on her accusations despite the obvious slip-up. She kept screaming that I was a fraud and a thief. Since she refused to give in, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the National Creative Writing Competition's main office right in front of her live camera. With thousands of people listening in, the competition director confirmed on speakerphone that I hadn't even submitted an entry for the year. He stated clearly that since I wasn't a participant, it was impossible for me to have plagiarized anyone. Hannah stood there looking completely catatonic, whispering that it was impossible because she had seen me click the submit button. She demanded to know what kind of trick I was playing on them. I looked at her with pure indifference, finally realizing that every act of kindness she had shown me over the years was a lie. I had long suspected that they were spying on my work, but I had never been able to find the evidence until now. When I sat down to submit my work this time, I purposely disabled my internet connection at the very last second. Even though it looked like I had uploaded the file, the lack of a signal meant that the manuscript never actually left my computer. The people spying on me had no way of knowing about my little trick, so they proceeded with their plan as if I had officially entered. My original plan was to just walk away and quit the competition entirely. However, I realized that if I just quit, they would immediately become suspicious and find some other way to sabotage me. That would have messed up the trap I was carefully setting for Ethan. Instead, I played along and let them believe they were in control while I prepared to burn their entire scheme to the ground. I waited for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under them. Ava and Hannah both looked like they had seen a ghost when they realized I wasn't even in the running. I then pulled up my own original manuscript and shared it with the entire live stream audience, specifically highlighting the shocking twist ending I had written. The twist in my story was a thinly veiled allegory that forced the main character to confess to theft and illegal side businesses. As soon as the parallels were made clear, the chat section exploded with theories and outrage. The comments were moving at lightning speed, with people expressing their shock that their favorite literary idol could be such a monster. One user asked how a guy who looked so perfect could be capable of such disgusting behavior. People began attacking his mother's reputation as a professor, questioning how she could raise a son with no ethics. They were outraged that he had the audacity to steal someone's work and then try to destroy that person's life to cover it up. The crowd turned on Ava as well, calling her a traitor for siding with a stranger against her own brother. They were baffled by her lack of loyalty and called her actions the ultimate betrayal of family. A few people mentioned that they had suspected Ethan was a fraud for a long time, calling him a fake intellectual. They were disgusted that he used his cousin Sam to coordinate a harassment campaign against an innocent person. There were calls for him to be prosecuted for harassment and privacy violations immediately. In the middle of this storm, Ava finally seemed to process the fact that I had never actually entered the competition. She stood there in a daze and asked me why I hadn't told her I was withdrawing. She had the nerve to claim she had been working tirelessly for my benefit while I was just standing by and watching her struggle. Hannah jumped in to support her, calling me heartless for deceiving them. She brought up the chicken soup again, acting as if a bowl of soup excused her helping Ethan destroy my reputation. She told me she regretted ever helping me since I wasn't even serious about the contest. I let out a loud snort and told Ava to stop acting like she had any moral authority over me. I reminded her that she had spent months pretending to be a mute just to manipulate me, so she was the last person who should be talking about honesty. I told her that my decision to enter or leave a contest was my own business, and I didn't owe her an explanation for any of it. I looked them both in the eye and said they knew very well whether they actually cared about me or were just obsessed with Ethan's success. I pointed out that their version of caring was just a convenient excuse to keep me under constant surveillance. I told them they just wanted to make sure I followed their script and walked straight into the trap they had set for Ethan's benefit. Ava was clearly rattled by my accusations, and her voice began to shake with panic. She tried to argue that even if she had secrets, it didn't give me the right to attack Ethan's reputation. She threatened me with a defamation lawsuit, claiming I was destroying a good man's future with my lies. Ethan was actually watching the live stream from the police station, and he started putting on a tearful performance for the camera. He begged Ava to save him, claiming I was a monster who wouldn't stop lying until he was ruined. He turned to the officers and pleaded with them not to take my word for anything without seeing hard proof. He shouted that I was the one who should be in handcuffs because I was the real mastermind behind the fraud. He even accused the police of taking bribes from me to protect my interests. The lead officer frowned and told him to shut his mouth, warning him that making false accusations against the police would only make his situation worse. The officer explained that they had already gathered irrefutable evidence against him before they even arrived. He said they were trying to be discreet to save him some public embarrassment, but since he was making a scene, they would stop being polite. Ethan's face drained of all color the moment the officer mentioned the evidence. As I looked at him, I realized that every single thing about this man was utterly revolting and toxic. Once I actually dug into his secrets, I found out that he wasn't just malicious, he was also incredibly stupid. He had a habit of bragging about his illegal activities to people as if they were symbols of his status and power. He lived with the delusional belief that the world only hated the poor and would always forgive the rich for being immoral. Because of this, he never bothered to hide his tracks and was surprisingly open about his schemes around his acquaintances. His legions of fans were blinded by his wealth and good looks, never once questioning where his money actually came from. This arrogance made it incredibly easy for my private investigator to find all the dirt I needed in just a few days. Once the investigation was complete, I handed the entire file over to the New York Police Department immediately. There was no way the police would have shown up at a high-profile influencer's house without ironclad proof of a crime. Anyone with half a brain could see the walls closing in, but Ethan was too caught up in his own lies to see the truth. In front of nearly 500,000 live viewers, he was essentially digging his own grave with every word he spoke. I was more than happy to let him continue his public meltdown without any interference from me. When the police finally began listing his specific charges on the live feed, Ethan looked like he was about to have a total physical collapse. He eventually reached his breaking point and begged the officers to turn off the camera and just take him to jail. Watching him being shoved into the back of a police cruiser through Ava's phone screen gave me a sense of satisfaction I can't even describe. In my previous life, he had successfully smeared my name and destroyed my future, so I felt no guilt in returning the favor. As soon as Ethan's channel went dark, the massive audience, hungry for more drama, flooded into Ava's live stream. The tone of the chat shifted the moment they saw me on screen, with people asking if I was the real award-winning author they had heard about. Some users commented on how humble I seemed, while others praised the brilliant way I had managed to turn the tables on my accuser. They were impressed that I had systematically dismantled Ethan's lies with such precision and flair. I started gaining thousands of new followers instantly, but many were distracted by Ava's presence in the room. They asked if the woman who had been defending a criminal this whole time was really my biological sister. People were calling her out for betraying her own blood to help a man like Ethan, and some even speculated that she must have been adopted. The general consensus in the chat was that I needed to cut ties with her as soon as possible for my own safety. They didn't go easy on Hannah either, mocking her for being so easily fooled by a fraud like Ethan. Many people felt sorry for me, saying my circle of friends was a literal nightmare of toxic people. Ava and Hannah were visibly shaking after seeing Ethan hauled away in handcuffs. However, they were so addicted to the massive spike in their viewer count that they couldn't bring themselves to end the broadcast. It didn't take long for the crowd to focus their vitriol on them instead of Ethan. The relentless mocking and insults eventually became too much to handle, forcing them to end the stream with looks of pure fury on their faces. They gave me one last murderous glare before rushing out the door to follow the police to the station to check on Ethan. As I watched the digital tide turn in my favor, my mind drifted back to the agonizing memories of my previous life. In that timeline, Ethan's accusations had made me famous for all the wrong reasons. That sudden explosion of attention had been nothing but the sound of my life and career being torn to pieces. I had barely survived the psychological trauma of that national hate campaign. Even though I was currently being hailed as a hero on the internet, I couldn't find a single reason to celebrate. The public's affection and hatred were both incredibly shallow and fickle. Most people didn't actually care about the truth. They just wanted to be on the winning side of whatever trend was popular that day. It was ironic that the same mindless public opinion was now the very tool I used for my revenge. However, Some of the comments in the live stream had inadvertently sparked a very disturbing question in my mind. I understood Hannah's motives clearly, as she was just a social climber who thought Ethan was her ticket to a better life. But I couldn't understand why Ava, my own sister, would want to hurt me. I struggled to figure out why she would repeatedly betray me and try to ruin my future. A dark thought crossed my mind that perhaps we weren't actually related by blood, and my chest tightened at the possibility. I hurried back to the apartment while Ava was still at the police station. I managed to find one of her stray hairs in the bathroom and immediately sent it off to a lab for a private DNA test. After Ethan was in custody, the mystery of how he had managed to copy my work word for word was finally solved. My first theory was that Ava and Hannah had hidden cameras in my office at home. I also suspected they might have installed some kind of sophisticated spyware on my laptop. But when I moved into the studio, I had a professional technician scrub my computer, and he found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The lack of an answer was driving me crazy with frustration. Fortunately, Professor Miller's father was a retired detective with the NYPD, so I decided to lay out the whole story for him. He listened carefully and then suddenly fixed his gaze on the glasses I was wearing. He asked if he could take a closer look at them for a second. I handed them over without thinking twice. He pulled out a high-powered magnifying glass and examined the frames for several minutes before his eyes lit up with a look of grim confirmation. I had no idea what he had found and looked at him in total confusion. He handed me the magnifying glass and told me to focus specifically on the tiny screw on the front of the frames. I leaned in and felt my entire body go numb when I saw a microscopic pinhole camera lens hidden right in the center of the screw. It was so perfectly integrated into the hardware that it was completely invisible to the naked eye. My mind raced back to a month ago when I was first preparing my application for the contest. Ava had supposedly accidentally sat on my old glasses and broken them beyond repair. She had been so apologetic about it and insisted on buying me a trendy new pair of designer frames as a replacement. I liked the way they looked, so I never questioned her generosity, never imagining she was actually turning me into a walking broadcast station. Everything clicked into place as I realized why she always knew exactly where I was and what I was writing. Professor Miller's father explained that this kind of high-tech surveillance equipment was military-grade and not something you could just buy at an electronics store. He noted that the possession of such devices usually required a federal permit, which made him suspect that Ava was involved in something far more dangerous than simple family drama. His suspicion sent a wave of terror through me as I thought about Ava's background. She had a degree in computer science from a top university, but had strangely chosen a low-paying job as a junior editor at a small publishing house. Her job allowed her constant access to high-level researchers and professors from all the major universities in the city. I started to wonder if her role in my life was just a small part of a much larger and more sinister operation. I didn't waste another second and carefully pried the microscopic camera out of the frames. I handed it over to the retired detective and begged him to take it to his contacts at the FBI. With that device in my possession, I finally had the hard evidence I needed to prove Ethan had been stealing my work in real time. In my previous life, that lack of evidence allowed them to sue me into poverty for supposedly violating the rules of the competition. I made a silent vow that I would not let him get away with it this time. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when the undeniable truth was finally dragged into the light of day. I had no intention of letting Ava or Hannah escape the consequences of their actions either. I compiled everything I had found regarding Ava's suspicious behavior and submitted it to the proper federal authorities for investigation. Since Ava had spent her entire life carefully hiding her true identity, I decided to do her a favor and rip that mask off once and for all. I wanted her to feel the exact same public humiliation that she had put me through in my past life. Once the legal process was in motion, I packed my things and moved out of that apartment forever. I relocated to a secure mansion in the Hamptons that I had purchased with a small portion of my lottery winnings. Having $80 million in the bank gave me the absolute freedom to live my life exactly how I wanted. Most importantly, it meant I never had to listen to Ava's fake concern or deal with Hannah's constant betrayals ever again. After settling all the legal paperwork, I blocked both of their numbers and all their social media accounts. I then booked a luxury cross-country tour, deciding it was time to finally enjoy my life and forget about them for a while. It was the middle of summer break and the perfect time to get away from everything in New York. The trauma of my past life had left my nerves raw and on edge, and I desperately needed some space to breathe and heal. I spent a month traveling and finally felt like myself again by the time I returned to my new home. I was carrying a bunch of gifts for Professor Miller when I unexpectedly ran right into Ava at the entrance of the gated community. She looked so terrible that I almost didn't recognize the woman I had lived with for most of my life. She had lost a frightening amount of weight, her skin was sallow, and her eyes were bloodshot and filled with desperation. Before I could even call for security, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength and forced me into the passenger seat of her car. She gripped my shoulders and demanded to know why I had moved out without telling her, claiming she had been sick with worry. I just rolled my eyes and told her that she wasn't worried about my safety. She was just worried that I wouldn't be around to bail Ethan out of his legal mess. Ava's expression faltered for a second before she switched back to her soft, manipulative tone. She told me she understood why I was upset about her lie about being mute, but she insisted that she was still my sister and loved me. She asked how I could be so cruel to her when she had spent so much energy trying to find me. I let out a tired sigh and told her that since she could see I was perfectly fine, she could let me out of the car now. As I reached for the door handle, she lunged forward and pulled me back into the seat. She looked like she was struggling to find the right words, which only made me more impatient. I told her to get to the point because I had a busy schedule and no time for her games. Ava let out a long, dramatic sigh and tentatively asked if I could find it in my heart to help Ethan. She claimed he was the son of one of her most important clients and that this entire scandal had completely destroyed his future. She told me he was on the verge of a total mental breakdown and begged me to do it as a personal favor to her. I frowned and reminded her that Ethan and I were barely acquaintances, so I had no idea what she expected me to do. Ava's eyes sparked with a sudden hope as she suggested that I tell the public that the manuscript was actually mine. She wanted me to lie and say that I had submitted it under Ethan's name as a prank, claiming that this would clear his name instantly. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at the absurdity of her request and asked her if she was actually serious. She nodded eagerly, her face filled with a desperate expectation that I would just go along with her insane plan. My anger finally boiled over, and I asked her if she realized she was asking me to commit perjury and obstruct justice. I shouted that she was basically asking me to go to prison for a man who had tried to destroy me. Ava's expression instantly turned cold as she told me she knew about the $80 million lottery win. She argued that since I was now rich and successful, helping Ethan wouldn't cost me anything, and she reminded me that I had entered the contest for her sake anyway. She begged me to do this one last thing for her as her brother. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled slowly, repeating her words back to her before asking if she was actually my sister at all. Ava's entire body went rigid the second the question left my lips, and she immediately looked away, stammering that she had no idea what kind of nonsense I was talking about. The DNA results had actually arrived a few days ago, and the conclusion was exactly what I had expected. The report confirmed that there was zero biological relationship between me and Ava. No real sister would ever try to grind her own brother's life into the dirt for the sake of a stranger. As soon as I had the test results, I launched a full investigation into the circumstances of my birth. My search uncovered a decades-old scandal that had been buried in hospital records. It turned out that Ethan was Ava's actual biological brother, and I was the true heir of the wealthy Harrison family who had been swapped at birth. 20 years ago, my biological mother and Ava's mother were in the same maternity ward at a hospital in Chicago. My legal family, the Millers, were incredibly poor and struggling to survive. The Harrison family was at the top of the social ladder. Ava, who was already obsessed with her baby brother, took advantage of a power outage in the hospital to swap our bassinets so her brother could grow up in a world of wealth and privilege. Our entire lives were redirected because of her one selfish act. However, Nature proved stronger than her plan, as I grew up inheriting my biological mother's intellect and my father's natural charisma. I was always at the top of my class, and my legal relatives used to joke that it was a miracle a family of dropouts like the Millers could produce such a brilliant child. I used to just laugh those comments off, never imagining they were the literal truth. When Ava realized I had pieced together the entire story of our birth, her face turned into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. I saw her hand creeping toward a small knife she kept in the side pocket of the car door. I let out a mocking laugh and asked if she was really going to try and kill me now, wondering if Ethan was truly worth spending the rest of her life in prison. I reached into my pocket and hit play on a recording I had secured through the private investigator. Ethan's voice filled the car, calling Ava an annoying mute and laughing about how she actually believed she was his sister just because he humored her once in a while. He went on to call Hannah a pathetic lapdog and said that Ava was a disgusting old woman who needed to stop having delusions about being part of his high society life. He admitted that the only reason he ever spoke to her was so she would help him win a competition. He complained about how annoying it was to deal with poor women who didn't know their place. While the recording was still playing, Ava let out a scream of rage and shoved me violently out of the passenger side door. I tumbled onto the pavement as she floored the accelerator and sped away into the night. I assumed she was heading straight to the police station to confront Ethan about his insults. A few hours later, I received a call with news that I never expected. Ava was dead. Driven to the edge by the recording, she had managed to get a private meeting with Ethan and told him the truth about their biological connection. She thought the news of their bond would finally make him love her. To her horror, Ethan was disgusted by the idea of being related to a commoner like her. In a fit of narcissistic rage, he lunged at her and pushed her off the rooftop balcony of the building. As she fell, she tragically landed directly on Hannah, who was waiting for her on the sidewalk below. Both of them died instantly, and Ethan was subsequently charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. It was a perfect, albeit gruesome, example of karma finally coming full circle. I sat in silence for a long time after hearing the news, but I decided then and there that I had no interest in reaching out to my biological parents. My life had been set on a different course 20 years ago, and I was content to let the past stay buried. I just wanted to live my own life, using my $80 million to travel the world and write the stories I had always wanted to tell. I had won the battle, but my heart remained heavy with the realization that the crowd was more dangerous than any individual villain. I learned that the sharpest weapons in the world aren't made of steel, but of the cruel words spoken by people who never have to face the consequences. For some people, a quiet departure from this world is the only happy ending they will ever find.